Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So this is a spicy one. Bobby and his boys pulled out for 160 million. Kinda. Here's the deal. Nvidia right now are letting people access games that they own. And publishers don't really like that. It's quite the situation. So Nvidia went live with Geforce NOW last week. And Geforce NOW is a service that's exactly what Stadia isn't. It is cloud gaming. It's a cloud gaming solution that uses your library that you already own across loads of different platforms, and it puts the gaming experience first. But there's one problem here, of course. The publishers, third parties, right, providing services to their customers in return for money. Well, hey, the publishers could be doing that. That could be their money. At the very least, Activision-Blizzard seem to think so, as they have pulled out. Now, if you're new here, then hello, we're an indie game studio. More about that on our site with our new email list down below. There'll be some stuff there soon, and we also do 6 game industry news and analysis videos per week, so sub if you'd like more of that, and hit that like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm. It truly does help. And with that, let's get into the video. So, Geforce NOW came out the gate pretty strong, and then was almost immediately crippled. A lot of games that were available in its beta testing period from a big variety of AAA publishers, well, they disappeared. The most recent publisher to pull out their offerings is Activision-Blizzard, and initially thought to have been done without much of a solid reason. It was later revealed via the Esports Observer that ActiBlizz's deal with YouTube for their esports content also included a Google Cloud Services agreement. Now, it seems, therefore, that allowing their content to actually run on Nvidia's servers would violate that agreement, and perhaps the only way we would actually see ActiBliz content on a streaming service is via Google Stadia, which is probably not what we'd want. Now, as you'll soon see in our Geforce NOW review, that's actually pretty bad news for customers, because Geforce NOW is very consumer-friendly in its setup. Hopefully, though, they don't ask to purchase ActiBliz games in Stadia again if it does go up there. Now, it is worth noting that Blizzard's EULA actually does include a clause that prohibits accessing their games through streaming anyway, which is a bit bizarre. So even without a deal with Google, they would have been able to pull their games, but they did just let their games be on Geforce NOW beta for ages, and they have worked with Nvidia for Modern Warfare's RTX support, which is a major marketing point. But still, really here, I doubt that Nvidia supported them with RTX to the tune of $160 million, which is the reported value of their Google deal. So that's what's going on there. So the big question then, why would all of these publishers be going out of their way to rain on Nvidia's parade? Well, Geforce NOW seems like a win-win situation, right? Nvidia provide a good service that requires game ownership, and that incentivizes people actually purchasing games from supported stores like Steam and Uplay, which in turn should be good for the publisher, right? It allows players to, play the games they own by basically borrowing Nvidia's hardware in the cloud, either for free in a limited fashion or for a reasonable enough fee, I would say, for ray tracing support and priority access. So you might think, everyone wins in this situation. The thing is, the publishers don't seem to win enough. Unlike with Netflix, right, where streaming caught television off guard and really won, we're kind of going into this cloud revolution with gaming, but with everyone's eyes on the prize. Publishers and platforms have got plans for cloud services, and thus anyone who isn't going to, give them a slice of their pie is competition. Activision-Blizzard may just be starting down that path with their Google deal. And even if the games won't go to Stadia, they're definitely going to consider using Google's cloud services to, I would imagine offer their own streaming or something like that. And, likely at a premium of some sort. Now, I can only imagine that other publishers would be following suit here. Publishers with the means to pursue their own platform to monetize will do that. And those who don't have the means to make their own platform, they're going to wait until somebody comes along begging for content, and there's going to be exclusivity there. There's going to be deals. Content is king, especially when it comes to selling services, and everyone in that market knows it all too well. They aren't going to do something as silly as to, give out access for free when they can get a platform to pay handsomely for it. And that's the problem with Geforce NOW. It's actually so good for customers. It's so open and well designed that, yeah, for a publisher who really wants to be getting every single, dime out of their content, it's not really going to work for them. Now, with that said, let's actually go into a bit of a review of Geforce Now, because it certainly is an interesting streaming service, even for those of us, maybe like myself, who are not necessarily even interested in streaming services in the first place. So it definitely has its kinks to iron out, but I would say the Geforce Now is pretty darn good. I mean, it felt really responsive when playing a decent chunk of Dead Cells and Dark Souls 3. And it offers a few different settings, actually, which is way more than Stadia, and one of those is competitive mode that's 720p 120 FPS, and that really cuts down on the input lag. Now, is it a cinematic experience? No, but it does feel pretty decent to play. Dead Cells was less than ideal when I tested it, especially whenever like some of the hitches in the connection would skip a few frames of video, but it was, I would say, very playable. It's hard to overstate like how bad the competitive mode actually looks though, so it's a setting you'll want to use with I guess a bit of care, but the actual game feel they've really nailed there. Now, on the 60 FPS 1080p setting at the max bitrate of 50, Dark Souls 3 honestly looked pretty good, and the cost was a tiny bit of latency. I mean, it couldn't hold a candle in terms of like, say, to how it feels locally, but it was a completely acceptable experience. Now, the same issue of requiring like a stable internet connection does exist here, because yes, it is a streaming service, but on that front, Geforce Now absolutely trashed Stadia. Like, in the same setup, literally identical to our Stadia review, that for Stadia resulted in basically unplayable rubbish. That ended up feeling a lot more playable with Geforce Now. And even when the video did like stutter hard, the actual inputs were still going through fine. Kind of felt like sneezing during regular play rather than, getting temporarily disconnected from the game, which is how Stadia felt. Now, that said, it still obviously does run afoul, of problems with poor internet, right? With stuttering and some latency spikes absolutely causing headaches if you're not in an optimal setup. I mean, playing Dark Souls 3 on 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi with a Bluetooth controller, that was notably worse than on a PC with a 5 gigahertz, band Wi-Fi and a wired controller. And then Ethernet is, of course, better than that. And certainly playing a fast-paced shooter like Doom, that's a mediocre experience. As with other cloud gaming services, like, look, this is not for fast action games. Say Dark Souls, right? That's a more slow, considered game, and it would play just fine. Maybe Sekiro a bit less so. I mean, I never recommend playing like a character action game, a really intense shooter, or a fighting game in this, but that said, there's a lot of other games, and definitely in suboptimal conditions, it beat Stadia, and under optimal conditions, it also beat Stadia. Nvidia really do seem to have done a good job here in optimizing the things that actually matter for gameplay. It's almost as if they understand their audience, somewhat unlike Google when you actually look at some of the decisions they made with Stadia. Then moving on, the game selection itself does feel a little bit arcane. So first, you can't import your own library or anything like that. You've got to manually search for games on their list. And then because their backend is essentially just a Windows virtual machine running Nvidia hardware, you essentially remote into a PC, and then the PC that you remote into, that will open up, Steam, Uplay, or whatever your supported, or your game's like, launcher is. You then sign on with your details, and then it launches the game. Now, on Steam, that actually technically involved installing the games, but that is basically instant. So for their supported games, all the files for those games are actually on their data center, so if you do the Steam install, it basically just processes for a second to grab them, and then you're good to go. Now, if you try to open a game that is not what you selected, then the software will stop you. You can, though, and this is very interesting, you can play games that are not officially supported, because at the end of the day, it's just a Windows virtual machine. So if you select Steam instead of a game in Geforce Now, their software actually just lets you install whatever the hell you want, unless it is explicitly unsupported. Now, a huge portion of the games that we tried, actually were. And there's no way of actually telling what games do work until you try to install them and, whether it actually works or gives you an error. So that can be a frustrating and janky experience. And then for games that they don't have in their data center, you do just have to download them. Now, that's not a huge deal if you're playing a small game, and the download, it's like a solid 30 megabytes down, so it's pretty quick. But certainly, though, it's not a polished experience. I mean, it's fine for me. I'm used to running VMs, but maybe not for people who are less used to that. I'd then also say that it's just not that nice to use. And while really, I'd say none of the cloud services have got a great UX, this is probably the weakest of the lot. I mean, having to navigate Steam on a phone via big picture, that's not exactly a great experience. So I'd say it's pretty darn clear that this is a service for PC gamers overall, and it's definitely not something that's trying to replace your gaming PC, like say Stadia seems to want to do. I would say this feels like a bonus product for existing PC gamers. Maybe if you own a budget PC, right, and you want to fire up a game in Geforce Now to see what it would actually look like maxed out. I mean, you'll have to deal with some encoding, but you can do that. If you're a traveling gamer, right, you've got a good PC at home, maybe this would eliminate the need for a gaming laptop, assuming you've got a really good internet connection wherever you're going to be going. Because certainly if you've got a good wired connection, this is a pretty good experience. And also, like, this is a service that lets you play your games locally because, you own them. All this service does is say, hey, that game you own, you can play it over there away from your computer. That's all this is really doing. Very different to the sort of global domination feeling things like, like say Stadia. Again, I mean, I don't want to just be sitting here bashing on Stadia all the time, but I mean, it's so bad. It's so poorly conceived, and it's just such a great example of being a little bit, I mean, it's pretty aggro in how it wants to like get into the market, whereas what Nvidia have done here is just a really good additive thing that is reasonably priced that just, it adds to what you already own. And that's why I fundamentally do support what Nvidia are doing here, even though it's not necessarily up my alley personally. But I'll tell you what though, this does take me back to a broader point, and maybe one of the most important ones in this video. The lack of game availability sort of highlights a frustrating element of this world of digital games that we're in. I mean, we bang on about ownership quite a lot here, especially in the realm of streaming. Now, while Geforce Now realistically should not have this problem, this is one of the first wide cases of games being denied to what I would say are rightful players. And look, it's not entirely clear-cut here, but the idea here is that you're just borrowing third-party hardware to play a game that you own. You're just logging into your Steam account on Nvidia's data center. If publishers truly believe that that's not fully within a consumer's reasonable right to do, you know what? We've got a darn problem on our hands in terms of ownership and what that means. I mean, with Geforce Now, more than any other time, it really does feel like we're just not being allowed to play the games that we own in the way that we want to. That is an awful precedent for companies like Activision-Blizzard to be setting with what they've done here, because yes, it's just playing your game on someone else's computer. Fundamentally, that's it. I mean, also, say the cloud PC rental service Shadow, that could fall completely foul of what we're talking about here as well. We've not got to try it out yet, but it's similar enough to Geforce Now, and you connect to Shadow's hardware in their data center, and then you can just play whatever the hell you own. Publishers setting the rules on how we can play their games that we own, I mean, we don't really own, do we? That is one of the most startling real-world sort of impacts that we're seeing of digital ownership, basically meaning piss all in the modern day. And I think this is a massive problem. I mean, look, I know you probably think watching our channel, we just have this thing for doom and gloom and sort of stuff like that, but I mean, I think digital ownership is extremely important, and this really does highlight it. Now, there's one other thing that kind of crossed our minds, and that a little bit of this feels like an online net cafe, if you think about how they were experienced. I mean, that's basically like the market Geforce Now seems to be going for. And I mean, if free-to-play publishers continue to play ball with them, it might actually be successful. I mean, as the first service to have a free variant, Geforce Now might actually do a lot to bring cloud gaming into the conversation in a way that only a consumer-focused product can. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Geforce Now gets actually quite a lot of phone-only gamers, maybe playing like PC free-to-plays or something like that. Now, that said, as to whether PC gamers will show up in force, I do kind of doubt it, right? While Geforce Now is a great attempt, cloud gaming is just not ready for everyone yet, I would say. Now, that said, it's also possible that we're a bunch of snobs. Look, I basically can't play console games because of the input lag and the frame rates. Take Bloodborne. The frame timing specifically there were a massive issue for me. I'm just used to 100 hertz, right? I've had a 100 hertz monitor for a very long time. So, look, it probably feels worse to me than it is, and I'd say that for people who are used to playing on consoles, this is probably a really good option that in some situations, like the 720p competitive mode, might actually feel better. Certainly, though, the benefit here with with Geforce Now is it's got a free version and you can try it out, which is certainly better than the Stadia situation. And then just one point to wrap up this video on. So the current business elements are already threatening to split the market up, so that I would say the massive disruptor that Netflix was to cable cable TV might actually never happen in gaming. Here's the situation. People loved Netflix because it wasn't cable, right? It was just one thing you could get. But then the streaming services got so fractured that now people are back to having multiple subscriptions. It's kind of like the cable bundle problem. Now, if game streaming starts off like mid to late stage TV and movie streaming, then I doubt it's going to catch on as much because we're never going to be at a time where, you know, there's that Geforce. Imagine if Geforce Now came out a few years ago and it was just as good as it is now and you could play every single game you have wherever you are, completely platform agnostic. That could probably drive streaming to a lot of gamers. But now, what has actually happened? Geforce Now has launched at a time where, you know, publishers are pulling out, the market is more fractured, so now the actual experience of using game streaming is just not really as good because, yeah, the market's being divided up as people try to grow their platforms, and ultimately what happens is the consumer loses out, and that's what we see here. Geforce Now is a very consumer-friendly, well-designed platform, and, yeah, it's been damaged for it, and that kind of sucks, well, for Nvidia and also for us. That said, I also don't want to sound like a massive Nvidia shill here. I'm also very aware of the shady stuff Nvidia have done as a company in the past. So I do want to be very clear here that, yeah, I'm certainly no Team Grain fanboy on, you know, on that situation. But this is just me talking specifically about that service. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think about Geforce Now. I mean, it's free. Have you tried it out? What was your experience? I would love to know. And yeah, with that, cheers. Check out our mailing list and website down below, and I'll see you next time.